Meet Peanut. Peanut is what we've named this specific ceramic dog from Meiji-era Japan. For our Animation Studio 2 class with Professor Nelson Lim, our group was tasked with creating an animation featuring one of the Crow Museum's various artifacts. Picking Peanut was honestly a pretty easy decision because most of us were immediately drawn to how pretty and cute this little dog is. We wanted our animation to be pretty simple narratively so that we could focus on capturing the feeling of our chosen environment, which was this garden. And since a ceramic dog like this in Meiji-era Japan would be used in common households as a decoration, we wanted to show its kind of equally humble beginnings in a working class environment. In this class, our professor really emphasized the project management method of Scrum. So that is what we utilize throughout the semester. Basically, every week or every 2 weeks, we would start a new sprint and we would identify all of our goals for that sprint, and we would basically work in small increments towards our goal towards the end. We also had daily meetings that we would call our Scrum time every single day at the exact same time, and this was just to make sure that we're all on the same page. We would touch base over Discord, sometimes over text, sometimes we would all hop in a call, and it would just keep us on track to finishing this project in a timely manner and making sure that we all are still seeing the same vision and we're getting feedback from the rest of our group and being held accountable for the work that we're doing. So yeah, that being said, this team ended up working really well together. Although we had some hiccups in the middle there, we managed to find a solution to every problem that we had and make sure that everybody was doing fine and that we were content with how our project was going, and we ended up with this wonderful animation. We had a wonderful team working together this semester. It's basically our entire animation cohort. My name is Uma. I was the producer and editor on this project. We also have Masa, who worked on concept art, texturing, and lighting. Richard, who worked on pretty much everything, honestly, but primarily setting up the environment, doing all of the technical work, modeling and rigging and animation, VFX, pretty much everything. Blaze, who was our primary lighting artist and worked on lighting and layout. Michael, our main animator, who worked on pretty much most of the animation. Jordan, who worked on VFX, sound, and editing. And Josie, who worked on quite a few things as well, storyboard, animation, and also served as our creative director.
Hi, I'm Josie. I am the storyboard artist as well as the creative director for this project. Most of my work ended up being on the storyboard process, which took place the majority of our first couple months. As you can see, our first draft of this project right after we met Peanut is very different from the final product. When we were first introduced to Peanut, I was very drawn towards the motifs on his side that showed these beautiful little red flowers, and it made me think about what I have grown to associate with Japanese culture, which are the giant Japanese gardens that you can go to and walk around. So I was picturing this massive, beautiful garden full of flora and fauna and koi ponds, and I took that and ran with it and decided that the original idea was going to be to pepper in hints of Peanut throughout the scenery. So he would appear in the sky in a constellation, the flowers on his side would be all throughout the garden, and then we'd have this big reveal of Peanut being painted and finished up on a beautiful gazebo in the middle of a lake. After some critique, we scrapped that idea entirely, and we were given a history lesson. We actually learned a lot about the Meiji period during this time, specifically that it is the time frame in which the Industrial Revolution really hit Japan. So we learned that peanut was most likely a household item, mass-produced, made for just the average person and made by the average person. So in our second iteration, in what eventually became our final product, I really scaled down that garden. I turned it from this massive, beautiful feature into just a very nice household Zen garden. The other change I made is that we spent some time researching, trying to figure out what exactly was the flower on Peanut's side and all throughout his body. And we came across the realization that it was most likely a spider chrysanthemum, which is very different from a spider lily that most people know. And the important part about this is that the spider chrysanthemum actually has a festival dedicated to it that takes place every year in Japan on September 9th. So we decided to set this story on that day specifically. So we added up in a bunch of like pretty fall colors and nice ambiance in that sense, as well as introducing that industrialization aspect with the final scene where we see Peanut being set up to be sold at a shop. I was also in charge of doing some camera animation, which was pretty straightforward. I did a lot of working in Maya in my undergrad, so I went into this project in Unreal knowing how to animate. And like I said, it was fairly simple. We did have one problem, which was that one camera was accidentally used to animate on 3 shots. So our biggest bump in the road there was me having to go back in and create a couple more cameras and just painstakingly set them up to the exact coordinates I had set up the glitched out camera on. And then while I wasn't doing that, after the storyboarding and the camera, I worked on animating some character leaves. So we had the particle leaves that you see in the background and in the establishing shot of our piece, but we also had in mind adding in about 3 special leaves that would draw your eye to specific parts of the garden and composition. And I was in charge of animating those and making them look natural enough that your eye would glance at them but not take up the majority of your attention.
Hello, I'm Massa. Um, at the beginning, since we wanted to show a garden and a luxury fancy space, I designed a garden inspired by old painting from the Meiji period. I tried to create a sense similar to Zen garden. Here, some of the concept for garden artist workspace, backyard. Later, we changed the story, and the focus became on Peanut, which is our artifact. We decided to build the narrative around Peanut as something that is also accessible to ordinary people. Here is a marketplace. Um, Here I designed several concepts for the main character, who is an artist, painting on Peanut. I also designed the character itself, and for the costume design, I was inspired by Meiji-era painting. Here's some color test. I also designed several leaves with detail and uh, texture. Um, After that, I create multiple screen designs for the artist's room background. I change the composition based on feedback, um, but I liked Josie's idea of taking inspiration from the specific flower that appear on Pinot. So I developed the design in the direction and added different texture and effects. At first, I placed the design on a very modern screen, and I also tested several other screen options. But in the end, we decided to keep it very simple, almost like wallpaper, to better match the mood. Here I use some old screen. Some of my design with different texture and different color. Here I used modern screen that it wasn't matched with our story. Finally, we decide to make something like this, more like wallpaper. Um, for me, the most challenging part was building reference. I used a mix of ready-made image and combined them with matte painting to create new reference. I think this helped a lot in the project because it allowed us to quickly build accurate visual reference for a specific historical time period because um, showing the detail and exact time. It was important for this project. Um, Also, for some shots, I used the same techniques to test different lighting setup. I think this really speed up the workflow and helps create a clearer understanding of lighting and composition. Here I took some screenshot of 3D part and I work in Photoshop and I add, light and textures. Here is artist work space. Using this technique, it's really helpful and we can see, the result quickly. Here with matte painting and combining different image, I make some reference. At the end, I want to share some of reference that helped me to create this concept. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Blaze Daner. I worked on the layout for the Zen Garden environment. So these are the first iterations that we kind of went with. One of the biggest problems that we ran into with this environment was trying to visualize what a Zen garden would look like in sort of the medium to low class um, kind of population of this time. And so you can see in the beginning we worked a lot with gravel and very clean, well kept grass and just an overall really polished garden. But after we did more research, we found that a lot of the gardens of this era were pretty messy, because they didn't have somebody to take care of them every day, and so gravel was kind of a higher end sort of thing. So you can see we kind of gravitated more towards very unkept, messy foliage, rocks with moss, kind of stuff like that. So you can see the concept that we really worked off of to really pull this layout off. And then finally, yeah, so this was kind of the last kind of iteration that we did, that we stuck with. And so what we have here are the leading lines in the environment. So what kind of separates a good layout and a great layout are the leading lines that guide the viewer's eye to sort of the subject of the scene. And so how I achieved this was I wanted, obviously, your eye to be drawn to the fountain. And so I put it on the left side of the screen and created these leading lines to help guide your eye. I used the stones to create an arch pointing towards the fountain. Some of the foliage on the left is helping to point as well. The bamboo shoot, again. And then we sort of have these tiles that I kind of pushed with light a bit, and created them to be very dark to create contrast between, this light in the garden and the shadows of the rooftop. And so that also helps guide your eye as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And so I also worked on the lighting. Here again, we have the first iteration. So one of the biggest issues I ran into with lighting on this project, and kind of the first iterations of our environment, was that it was basically in a box. So this garden was enclosed. And so the issue with that is, if you think about lighting a cardboard box with the top of it open, it's really hard to not make it flat. So making the lighting feel dynamic was a big kind of issue for me. And so you can see in the beginning, I kind of worked with shadow to try and create contrast. That didn't really work. So then I kind of gravitated more towards heavy fog and volumetrics, but that just ended up not looking the best. Doesn't really lead your eyes to the fountain and create kind of add depth to the environment. And so what I ended up doing was artificially kind of creating sunlight in a sense, so kind of faking sunlight with spotlights. So not all of my sunlight is just like a regular directional light. It's faked a lot with spotlights, as you can see in this breakdown. This is the unlit version, and then I'm going to come in here and add basic sunlight, basic skylight. And then I come in here and add a bunch of spotlights to really guide your eye to the fountain and highlight the path and highlight the leading lines in the layout. And then finally I added some volumetrics to help kind of point you to the fountain once again. And then this was the lighting on shot 70 of the marketplace. This is a breakdown. So this is the unlit version. And then so I'm going to come in here and add a basic directional light and a skylight. I really wanted the emphasis to be on peanut. And so I only added sunlight to the stall and none to the background. And so one of the issues that we ran into with Peanut and lighting him was that he absorbed light a lot more than any of the other objects in the scene. So the way I kind of worked around that was I faked the shadows with area lights, and then so you can see I brought up the values in the background so it wasn't extremely dark. You can still see them, but I also allow contrast kind of in the shadow between Peanut and the background. So then finally, to create emphasis on Peanut, I came in here and added a 3-point lighting setup on him. So I have him keylit and rimlit. Basically, I light him on the left and put a light behind him. And then finally, I add some volumetrics, very subtle, to help point your eye to him once again. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Hi, I'm Michael, and this is my portion of the animations that I did for our Peanut project. Some of the hardships and good parts that I encountered with this project was that with an animation, it takes a lot of reference to make it actually look decent. So with the help of some of my friends, I was able to get feedback, and I was able to make it look like the brush was actually being handled correctly. It's very important to nail down the specific sort of craft that Japanese artists had during this time, and I wanted my animation to reflect that. With the brush, the tool is so tiny, it really requires a lot of care and detail that just simply can't be captured with a large sort of blunt brush. So there was a lot of manipulation that had to be done. There was a lot of care that I needed to put into the animation. And a lot of good things that I encountered with this project was that with that feedback, it was easy to turn around everything. And I had a lot of help, namely some of the other animators, and even Richard, who isn't an animator, he helped with making the reference and also giving me some tips. I was able to produce something that I feel I'm quite proud of, and I believe that my friends are also proud of it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I believe that the client was also very proud of the animation. And it was very fun to work at such a finite scale with something having to do with history, and I've never really worked with a museum before, so this was also a fun experience. Working in projects, I've always done it. I've always worked on projects with people, but this is the first time that I was able to make a project I really enjoyed. Not really the outcome per se. I did enjoy the outcome, but I was able to enjoy the work that came, the journey that came with the outcome.
Hello, my name is Jordan Prado. I worked on photogrammetry with Richard, created the soundscape, and did some compositing on the masking shots, and then edited the final cuts of the film. For sound, each week I would update the animatic with new sounds according to the feedback I had gotten from previous weeks. I had to keep shifting around the sounds on the timeline until we timed down all the shots, and then I was able to focus on the small details and making sure things were the correct sound level. For the masking, I worked on shots 40, 50, and 60. I was given several layers of passes that I compiled together, and then I animated the mask to make it look like the brush was painting Peanut's colors on. For the editing, I took over putting each new version of each shot together with the sound once we moved on from the animatic stage into our 3D environments. So each week, the animators would give me their updated shots, and I would replace each old shot with the new one and make sure everything lined up well. When we finished the final film, I also put together the title and end credits.
Hi, my name is Richard Bantigue, credited as the technical director for this project. Meet Peanut started as an effort to digitally preserve and reimagine a Meiji-era ceramic dog through cinematic storytelling and historical research. Some of the parts I worked on included photogrammetry, environment design, VFX, rigging, animation, MetaHuman integration, and overall technical problem solving. A big part of my role was helping connect the research and technology together into a one cohesive experience. Our process started with photogrammetry. We captured Peanut using both cross-polarized and parallel polarized photography so that we could preserve accurate texture and surface detail while minimizing reflections from the ceramic glaze. We took pictures of Peanut from every possible angle, even turning it over to make sure no part of it was missing during reconstruction. Those images were then processed inside RealityScan to create a high-fidelity digital mesh. The original scan was over 13 million triangles, which was way too dense for a real-time cinematic pipeline. Through look-dev and optimization, I reduced the mesh down to around 25,000 triangles, while still maintaining most of the original detail and texture fidelity. The goal was to preserve the authenticity of the artifact while making it efficient enough to run inside Unreal Engine. Once Peanut was reconstructed, the next step was building the world around him. We wanted the environments to feel grounded in everyday Meiji-era life instead of feeling overtly stylized or romanticized. The garden was designed to feel quiet and reflective, while the marketplace was meant to feel lived in and accessible to ordinary people during that time period. A huge part of the environment process involved historical research. A lot of the existing asset libraries did not accurately represent Meiji-era props or materials, so I ended up creating several assets from scratch to maintain authenticity and visual consistency. One example was the Shishi Odoshi bamboo fountain. I spent a lot of time researching traditional Japanese water features from the Meiji era, learning how the fountain worked mechanically through gravity-fed water systems and understanding its cultural significance within the Japanese gardens. Historically, the rhythmic sound of the bamboo striking stone was used to deter animals and symbolically ward off bad spirits. Understanding both the mechanics and the meaning behind it helped me recreate it more authentically within the environment. Creating the water simulation itself became another major challenge. The early versions had issues with timing, positioning, and believable flow behavior. Attaching Niagara simulations to moving objects inside the sequencer caused additional problems where the water would activate incorrectly or lose synchronization during playback. After a lot of trial and error, testing, and refinement, I was able to create a more natural and cinematic result that integrated properly into the shot. Another challenge involved the painter silhouette sequence. The goal was to project the painter's shadow onto opaque panels while intentionally hiding Peanut and avoiding a clearly defined character identity. At first, the shadow projection completely failed because the material blocked too much light to create a readable silhouette. So after experimenting with ray trace shadows, shadow bounds, and lighting adjustments, I was able to create a cleaner and more controlled projection that preserved the mystery and atmosphere we wanted for the scene. To help bring the environments to life, I created several atmospheric VFX elements throughout the film. including drifting leaf particles, fireflies, marketplace dust, and layered environmental effects. The falling maple leaves were especially important because they help reinforce the feeling of autumn within the world of the film. One of my proudest contributions was the integration of MetaHuman characters. I really pushed for using MetaHumans because I believed realistic digital humans could help bridge the gap between stylized storytelling and cinematic realism. Using parametric clothing systems, I created variations between characters to make the marketplace feel more believable and populated. Adding more metahumans completely changed the energy of the environment and helped transform it from a static space into something that actually felt alive. I also contributed directly to several cinematic shots throughout the project, including the Shishi Odoshi sequences, the painter scenes, the paintbrush interaction shots, and the marketplace sequences. For the paintbrush shots, I rendered multiple layers separately for compositing inside Adobe After Effects. This allowed us to create the illusion that the painter was actively painting onto Peanut, while giving us more flexibility during post-production. Rigging and skin weighting were also important for achieving believable paintbrush movement. I created a rig setup and refined the skin weights to make sure the movement felt smooth and controlled during the animation. Using forward solve and backward solve workflows inside Control Rig allowed me to refine motion non-destructively directly inside the sequencer. Character development evolved a lot during production as well. Early concepts explored historically accurate ceramic artisans, but over time, we realized the project worked better when the painter became more symbolic instead of a specifically defined individual. So our final direction focused on a simplified silhouetted painter with minimal facial detail. By removing a clear identity, the character became more universal and atmospheric, allowing viewers to focus more on the gesture, process, and emotional tone of the film. Throughout the entire project, one of our biggest goals was balancing historical authenticity with cinematic storytelling. For me, Peanut became more than a digital reconstruction. It became a cinematic reawakening of a historical artifact through research, technology, and storytelling. Meet Peanut is a proud collaboration between UTD MFA Animation and the Crow Museum of Asian Art of the University of Texas at Dallas.